Okay. Kei te wā mota tīmata o tēnei hui. It's the time to start this hui. I've already said karakia earlier on, so gives us a little bit more time. So I think the best way to start this hui is to go around these wonderful panelists and let them introduce themselves. A bit of background about each other and also the language or the languages they have in their kete. Renee, let's start with you over in Perth. Just picking a name out of the hat. Go for it.
大家好，我係梁文慧，所以我係姓梁，喺香港嚟，同埋喺而家係喺出世喺Aotearoa, New Zealand， 同埋我而家喺Yamanji land. So I'm actually calling from Western Australia. My name is Renee Liang. And my parents came from Hong Kong, but I was born in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and grew up there, although I have lived and worked in quite a number of different places all over the world. So, yeah, welcome and thank you very much for having me.
Renee, hey Bindo Lido.
我喺呢度? No, 我而家喺
Hi Bindo Lido, your mother and father. Whereabouts in Hong Kong?
In Hong Kong, they actually grew up in mid-levels, but they're actually from northern China and Hainan Island. Okay. So they're from China. They were born in China. So, yeah.
Mgoisai.
Sheila.
Sheila. Correct me if I don't say your name correctly. So you introduce yourself, Miss Mannion.
Hello. Kia ora te whānau. Te iwa poshti. Hi everyone, Sheila. So it's very,
Sheila.
Yes, it's just that accent gives it the show. Yeah, I'm an Irish writer living in New Zealand for the past 10 years and a proud citizen of Aotearoa. Yeah, I write poetry and short stories and yeah, that's about it really.
We'll come back to you then. Thank you for that very brief introduction. Michelle Eho. Pehia koe tēnei rā. Ka nui te pai koe?
Kia ora. Ko kakaramea tōku maunga tō waikoto tōku awa, ko tainui tōku waka, ko Ngāti Tahunati Whao tōku hapu, ko Waimahana tōku marae, ko Rahurau tōku whānau. My name is Michelle Rahurahu Scott. I was raised by a fierce deaf wahine named Tui. So I am fluent in New Zealand Sign Language. Yeah, and I write poetry and I write fiction. But yeah, those are the languages. And I'm learning te reo Māori, which is yeah, I'm trying to braid those languages together as well as English. So kia ora.
Christina, young Christina, can you introduce yourself, please? This young girl I can see at the top of my screen.
Thanks for the young part and for the girl too. Olá a todos, boa tarde. Hi everyone, good afternoon. This was Brazilian Portuguese. I'm from Brazil. In Brazil, I published many language manuals while I was always writing fiction and keeping it to my drawer, even though my first book was a flash fiction one. And that was when no one was writing flash fiction at all. So people didn't know what to do with it back then. And it was very interesting when I got here in New Zealand that I found out about it being a consolidated genre. And then I started writing it and I applied, participated in some competitions. And I was really pleased to see that in some cases I did win a few prizes. And yeah, so I was invited. I write sometimes in English, sometimes in Portuguese. I tend to always translate. Have things in both languages. I speak a few other languages too, and I think that impacts my writing a lot too. Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot for having me here. I'm really enjoying your company, and I want to know more about all of you.
Tēnā koe, e hoa. Darren, can you talk about yourself a bit, please, e hoa, if we're still around?
Yeah. Can you
Oh,
all
he's
see me?
there. He's straight up.
Yes.
Good on you. Yeah, sweet.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, kia ora, nisam bulu vinaka be ke muni na marama watikira turanga e seama tuku mai, ni koa, na volvolango, na tondo daka na volvola. Na go Darren Kamali, au susu mai viti, mai suva, samambula North Numbo Street, nungu vasu mai levuka o valau, ndona ya nanukia. Io nungu vutalanga e tukuwe Samoa watake wala spotuna. Nisambula everybody, my name is Darren Kamali. I was born and raised in Fiji, 17 years before coming to Aotearoa, New Zealand. Yeah, most of my writing is about the islands and the city, the old and the new, contemporary heritage, traditional concepts that I try and change, and I'm trying to do a pan-Pacific approach to my writings nowadays. 4 publications of poems. I'm a poet. I write, and I may started off as a performance poet on the street corners of Auckland when I first came from Fiji, and now, yeah, I'm just sort of working for Auckland City Library. Well, I am working for Auckland City Library as the Pacific Heritage Advisor, and I've been there for 5 years now. Worked for 4 years at the Auckland Museum as well before this. So most of my writings and most of my focus is on the Pacific and its sort of location, its relationship to the world, especially from my homeland Fiji. And it's awesome to be on this panel. Vanaka value.
Ula vanaka. Sophia, can you please introduce yourself? Say a bit about the tongues that you have.
Thanks.
in the repertoire.
Thank you. My main languages, I suppose, are English and French, but I just really, thanks to my family, I have a sort of multicultural extended family, and thanks to them, I've been exposed to a lot of different languages, and like Renee, sort of lived and worked in different places around the world. And I'm speaking to you now from Nambucca Heads in New South Wales, Australia, where I've been staying with one of my sisters who works full-time as a translator. And between me and my sisters and our partners and ex-partners as well, we have in our family Sri Lankan, Japanese, Tibetan, French, European, Australian, Pākehā, New Zealanders, and Chinese members of our family. So at different times in my life, I've learned and spoken to various degrees Russian and Italian, but more recently Mandarin Chinese. My partner migrated from China to Australia when he was 17, but I think in the past, when you migrated, the assimilation to your home, your new home country, kind of tended to come at the cost of maybe your native language and culture. So he has found it impossible to speak Chinese at home, even though he had very sophisticated Mandarin and different Shanghai dialects, but our children have been growing up without learning Chinese. So this really motivates me to teach myself Mandarin Chinese, and I've been teaching my kids. But yeah, here's to diversity of languages, and it's wonderful to be here and to be part of this panel. And thanks to NFFD for the idea and the creative initiative.
Xie xie wo pangyo. Han hao.
Then how?
I won't talk about myself, but just very briefly, similar to Sophia, a very mixed whānau, so many languages. English here is, as I said on a radio interview a little while ago, is about the 15th backward ragged cousin. It's not spoken. It can be spoken, but it's not important to be spoken here. So we get by with Māori, Tagalog, Kapampangan, Cantonese, Putonghua, and a dialect my daughter-in-law has that I don't understand myself. So it's a Chinese dialect. So I want to move on now, and we'll sort of go through the panel again and ask the question, Pātai, how much is your language or languages evident in Aotearoa? I mean, let's forget about English. That's dominant. And as an Iron, and you might be able to correct me, as far as I understand, there's only 2 official languages in our country. Te Reo Māori and language for the deaf, Koda. English has never been made an official language as far as I know. I know some fella in Tauranga, some MP, tried to bring a private member's bill, but I don't know if it was ever passed. So English, this dominant hydra, what I've called the hydra from the north, has swamped the country, but I don't know if it's ever official. So let's forget about English because it's the dominant. How much does it dominate? So the question is, and Sheila, because you're on screen, how much is your own language or languages evident in Aotearoa?
Well, of course, I speak, I'm not a native Irish speaker. That's the language of my childhood. My father was a native speaker. But I do speak Spanish as well. I studied there for a year doing European politics, so I have some Spanish. But in the sense of Irish, I don't ever hear Irish here. When I first came here, I sought it out. I did seek to find it because my children had been going to a Ninra, which is the equivalent as the Kura here. And I wanted them to keep up their language. But there was really nowhere to find that, even in the Irish clubs. And I think because it's a colonized country, essentially, and because we've had our own battles with that revival of the language, it has become quite a political thing to speak the language, particularly outside of the country. So when you do find other Irish people, you have to be very careful about the way you might want to use the language with them, because it can be seen as a sort of quite an intimidating thing, maybe slightly aggressive sometimes. Some people are embarrassed about their lack of it. Some people are very supercilious about their grasp of it. You know, it's kind of fraught. It's a very fraught thing to do, to find it. So it's pretty much non-existent here. I mean, the way I bring it in is I use it in my own home with my children very casually. And I will use it in song quite a lot, but I don't really use it in my writing. I've only just started to do that, really. So it's not really here at all. And a lot of people aren't even aware, actually, here that there, in fact, is an Irish language. Okay. Which they sort of think it's all the same, or they get it confused with Scottish or Welsh and stuff like that. So, you know, it's, yes. Yeah. So even within the community, you can use it, but again, it's you have to be careful.
Yeah. Christina, the same Pātai, the same question. You're speaking a lot of Portuguese and other tongues. How evident is that, or are your languages in the New Zealand community? How obvious?
Well, speaking for Portuguese now, because I forgot to mention, I run the language department of a diversity promoting not-for-profit here in Hamilton called Earth Diverse. And we happen to offer Portuguese, and I teach it. And yeah, we struggle with registrations. I mean, I had 5 people registering for my 101 last year, but there are not many people interested in learning it. And I don't see much of it anywhere, no.
Your other tongues?
Well, I speak German, French, Spanish, and yeah.
And there'd be a much more evidence of those latter 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Spanish, we have so many new groups of Spanish and so many people coming to us for Spanish. We have more teachers. We have started a heritage Spanish program. And, you know, back in Brazil, I produced with a colleague, I co-authored a heritage Portuguese book, because that I had been and I have been publishing a lot in that area. And we didn't even manage to publish that one because, you know, people just don't. And of course, there's this connection between, you know, the language is so much connected with everything that happens in the country and the culture. And because Brazil is going through such a down moment, yes, coming from a high when Portuguese was starting to, Brazilian Portuguese was starting to get some, momentum. It all went downhill.
Yeah.
So that's the state of affairs for Portuguese as I see it.
Tēnā koe anō. Renee, your main languages, I mean, obviously English, but Cantonese, Putonghua, any other languages, and how evident are they in the Aotearoa community? Renee, please.
So I do speak Cantonese. I do not speak Putonghua, and in actual fact, it's a concern. So the language of the original Chinese New Zealanders who started coming to New Zealand in the 1870s by invitation, they're from southern China, so they're Cantonese speakers. But more recent migrants, as you know, to New Zealand are predominantly Putonghua or Mandarin Chinese speakers. And I have to say that their, language agenda has taken precedence. So for example, in New Zealand, every year we celebrate a Chinese Language Week, which should more accurately be called Mandarin Language Week, because that's the only Chinese language that's promoted, despite the fact that there are, as you've alluded, many, many Chinese languages, not dialects. They're labelled as dialects for political reasons by the Chinese government.
Including Cantonese.
Yes, Cantonese is actually from a completely different language background. So the language scholars, and same for Hokkien. Hokkien comes from a really different language. And there are people in New Zealand who speak all those languages and who are essentially shut out of any kind of national conversation. So obviously Cantonese, Hokkien, none of the other Chinese languages are also taught in schools or promoted in schools. It's only Mandarin Chinese that is promoted as the only Chinese language available. So when you ask me, do I speak Chinese, I tend to clarify. I say, well, there's no actual language that's called Chinese, just as there's no language called Indian. You have to ask me which Chinese language I speak, and then I will tell you. That being said, I think I have a really hard relationship with Cantonese myself, because like other people, Cantonese is my first language. Because I spent my first 2 years growing up in Hong Kong, so the first language out of my mouth was Cantonese. But after I returned as a young infant to New Zealand, I started attending kindy, and mostly English then took over in my brain, and so therefore the language is very it's very not very familiar, but over recent years, I've started using it in my writing, mostly again, because I was thinking, well, if I don't use Cantonese, it's going to become extinct through deliberate action from people who do not wish to, to see it spoken in the world, and do not wish it to be acknowledged as a cultural, pole on its own, because that's part of how you erase a culture. And so I wanted to use it in my writing in New Zealand and literature, and then I kind of discovered that in actual fact Cantonese was not gone from myself. It was just a little seed that had withdrawn, and when you start to water it, it starts to flower again. And so there were some beautiful things that I've discovered through essentially forcing myself to use Cantonese.
Whole five.
Yeah. So I've been using it. I still speak it like a 3-year-old, and anybody who speaks Cantonese will understand from my introduction. I've got a very strange accent. I speak it kind of with only 2 tones, so I sound like somebody who is trying to speak a language I've never heard properly, but I still try.
Ngoi sai o Pangiao. Michelle, he atu kōrero mo te reo Māori I roto I te whenua o Aotearoa e naine e ho. He atu kōrero, he atu whakaro. Michelle.
Hi, kia ora. Sweet. Sorry, I was going to say that I whakapapa to Ireland as well, and now I wanted to bring that out because there was some kōrero on the Irish connection. County Donegal. So, but whakaro I te reo Māori. But I think when I talk about te reo Māori, I'm a learner and I've never been fluent, like many Māori in this land. So there's a really strange, at the moment, there's this concentrated effort to get Te Reo Māori kind of out into the public and to revitalize the reo. And I like to, whenever I have this kōrero, I like to point towards this really wonderful study that was released in 2020 called Do Not Let the Language Suffer the Same Fate as the Moa. And it modeled language revitalization in Aotearoa for Te Reo Māori against Welsh. And basically the findings were, which I'm sure all of you will know and will resonate with, is that the communities that the language come from are the holders and the best community to revitalize that language. So so I like to, even though there is this really strong and really powerful push, I guess, in the wider public to have te reo signage or, have te reo kind of represented across the language, across the country, there's actually a kind of a decline in the language in terms of deep retention. And because of the sparse resources for language learning across the country, for there to be a proper revitalization, it needs to be directed straight at the communities, the Māori communities that are going to have that intergenerational retention. So that's my whakaaro I Te Reo Māori. And that's an interesting one in terms of what it looks like in the public versus what's the best for the language, that deep retention that's going to trickle down generationally. For New Zealand Sign Language, which is my first language, that's kind of the flip, and it's a good accompanying language, I think, when we're talking about Te Reo Māori, because there are only about 8,000 deaf signers, but the language is strong. The language is there. It is the only language that, the core language of that community. And it is developing, it is strong. If there's any signers in the room, they'll know that the language moves fast. Signs will change almost day to day. Every time I see my mum, she'll slap my hands and say, that's old, get that out. We've got this new language coming through. The speed in which language is changing and streamlining is very quick. So the language is strong, even though the numbers aren't high. So I think that's a good kind of nice representation of how, when the community holds the language, it thrives. That's something that I've been trying to bring into my work, into my poetry, into my writing, is having te reo and sign language represented in there, because they're such core pillars of my life. And I hope to bring it out some more. In terms of what you said, Renee, when you said you kind of speak your language like a 3-year-old, it made me think of one of my poems that I wrote, which is called Babbler, talking about trying to get that te reo Māori coming out. I talk it like a toddler. That's the only way that I can. That's the way that I can get that retention, is by saying all the words I know, like spitting them out like a baby. I encourage that babbling. If you're learning a language, I'm sure you'll know that you just have to kind of stumble along and get as many words out that you know as you can. So kia ora.
Tēnā koe mō tō whakautu tino mohio e ho, ka nui te pai tō kōrero. Ka huri ho ki te tāne, ki te ingoa. Darren, hei atu kōrero, what's your take on how much Fijian is spoken in the wider community in Aotearoa, seeing you're now a long-term resident here and working in one of the major institutions in Tamaki Makaurau? Darren, what do you reckon, mate?
Yeah, sorry, cutting out a bit. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can see you too. Did you hear me? Darren, you can hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you so much, Yvonne. I've been in Aotearoa 30 years this year in October. So I came in 1992 at the age of 17. I think I mentioned that before. There was hardly any Fijians here at the time. When I first came, went to Wellington, very culture shocked, and also the weather shocked as well. So, I've been here 30 years, started doing basking and writing and performance about 25 years ago, so 98. Hopefully you guys can still hear me.
Yes.
Fijian, like Renee was mentioning too, there are 300 dialects or languages in the Fijian, within Fiji itself. So I speak the Bowen language, which is he was the king at that time during the late 1800s. And he was the one who signed the deed of cession with Britain, Great Britain, in Fiji. And that's the village I come from, in Levuka of Laos. So yeah, it's been changing. I've got my sons born here in New Zealand, so they're living here in diaspora as well. I teach them the language through prayers, through songs, and through hymns and chants. But it's not the easiest thing to do, because we speak the common language of English every day, and then at school and stuff like that, and hardly find the time to do that. But in saying that, within my publishing, within my writings, I try my best to incorporate Fijian language into that, and also not just Fijian, but trying to be pan-Pacific, including Maori and the other Polynesian, Melanesian, and Micronesian islands within the Oceania Moana diaspora. And that, yeah, try and keep it within my writings too. Earlier on, I started writing in Fiji. I started by writing in Fijian, and then now I'm more sort of a bilingual, and trying to get more Pacific, sort of pan-Pacific approach to my writing and to my performances. If that answers that. And just saying that, yeah, Bula, Inaka.
Very good. So again, last but not least, Sophia, who has several tongues. Sophia, do you speak Australian, by the way? You didn't mention that.
I am told by people in Aotearoa that I speak Australian, but when I come home here, I get told I speak New Zealand.
Okay.
So, yeah, I don't know, it must be somewhere in between.
There is a distinct Australian sort of language.
Depends whether you're talking about the Pākehā Australian language or Indigenous languages. I would love to have learned. When I grew up, it didn't even feature that you could learn any of the Indigenous tongues in Australia. So,
and there's thousands of those as well.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but going back to the tongues, you mentioned that you had some prowess in. How much do you hear? I mean, you've resided in Australia for quite a while now, not just a fleeting visit. So, how much do you hear of those tongues? And that was a joke about, do you speak Australian? I meant,
yeah, I know.
I meant the Pākehā Australian, which intonation and vocabulary-wise is a distinct branch again. But go back to that question. The tongues you speak, how much do you hear them in the Australian general community?
Well, now I'm visiting. My mum's had a couple of strokes this year, so I'm visiting here for 1 week back in Australia. But normally I live in Otapoti outside Dunedin now. But I really don't hear a diversity of tongues at all where I live. And I think it depends where you live in Aotearoa and the communities that are around you. But I think the flourishing of a diversity of tongues, as well as our bilinguality, is such a precious thing. I think it's as some of you were saying, that even that experience of speaking like a toddler, when you try and you attempt to speak another language, is such a powerful way to understand what migrants coming who are trying to learn something like English go through. They lose the sophistication that they had in their own language, and they have to start from scratch. And I think just we shouldn't impose languages on other people, but that sort of reaching out to learn other languages can be a real expression of creativity and generosity, and a really powerful step towards diplomacy and peace and understanding and breaking down cultural barriers. So I have to make our home environment where we try to speak languages, and I homeschool my 3 kids, and we have a lot of languages going on there. But I think, even things like this project that we're all part of now, respecting and celebrating a diversity of languages, is really good move towards bringing the languages forth and as well as bringing them into our writing and just acknowledging that there are more ways to communicate than with English.
Tēnā koe anō e hoa. So yeah, you really focusing on the main kaupapa of this whole hui, the diversity of languages in Aotearoa. There's many, we're just some of the speakers of them, but I guess the consensus is they're not hearing enough of them in the community. But we're going to hear some more now because I'm going to ask everyone go through the list again to read something of their own mahi, their own tuhitanga, their own writing in the languages they feel happiest in reading. So, Christina, have you got a piece you would like to read to us, please? And you don't have to translate it into te reo Ingarihi either. Just read what you feel comfortable with. So, Christina, can I ask you that, please?
Sure. It's like most of my flash fiction, it's really short. Should I read it in Portuguese first and then in English?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Fine.
Okay, so you will hear the sound and you will see how feel it, because you won't understand, but you will feel it. Ruptura. Deixa a porta aberta, ela pediu, coçando as costas. Mas e a corrente de ar? Ele perguntou, tentando não atender o pedido. A casa vai ficar fria, justificou. Sim, ela respondeu, mas deixe aberta, por favor, e que entre o vento. Ele me ajuda, declarou ela, suas costas coçando cada vez mais. Ao ser atraída pelo limiar, ela sentiu algo romper em suas costas. Foi quando começou a eriçar a plumagem furta-cor das asas que ela não sabia que tinha. Bem ali, no espaço aberto, além da porta, e com a ajuda do vento, ela alçou o voo. Rupture. Leave the door open, she said, scratching the irritation on her back. But what about the drought? He asked, deflecting the request. The house will be cold, he added. Yes, she replied, but do leave it open and let the wind blow in. It helps me. Her back was itching more and more. Something burst free from her shoulder blades as she drew towards the threshold, and she began to stretch the feathers of the iridescent wings she didn't even know she had. With the help of the wind, and in the open space beyond the door, then and there, she took flight.
Very good. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, Sheila, can we ask you, please, to read something of your own mahi in your language you're comfortable with? Yeah. And I apologize if you can hear dialogue going in the back room. It's my daughter-in-law speaking to her mother, who's in the mainland, of course, mainland China, and they can't get to see each other because of the very restrictive COVID protocols. So my daughter-in-law can't go to China without having to isolate for 3 weeks, which is madness. So they're talking away over in the bedroom. And again, it's not Putonghua and it's not Cantonese. So it's another language again. Anyway, enough. Sheila.
I can't, but I almost wish I could. I'll read in Irish first and then in English as well. Fianisha. Tá éisig ma far céile go bhfuil mé na crétóras malacha an ban geartanach. Ach tá mé bóg agus rilis agus réige mar im. Agus tá meag céil eile agam agus far céile eile, tá spóin fanné. Testimony. My husband knows me to be that most cursed of creatures, a bad-tempered woman. But I really am soft and gentle and sweet. And if I had another life and another husband, I might prove it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sheila. So, this time we'll come back to you, Sophie, a little bit earlier than before. Please read to us a passage that you're happy with, perhaps in all the multifarious tongues that you have. Over to you, Sophia.
I'll start with the English version of, it's a poem that appeared in the New Zealand Poetry Society anthology in 2021. Moon Daughters. Year May, moon, winter plum blossom. Year her, moon, lotus. Year Lian, Moon, Lily. The names their father gave them fit for simple peasant girls, but stored like silks beneath t-shirts, jeans, and gumboots. Over jeans, they are wearing identical t-shirts, peace in cursive white across their chests, like wings, bandages, or a shield. And I'll just read it in French now.
That's the French version of this poem.
This is the French version of the same, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Fille de lune, yeux May, lune fleur de prunier d'hiver, yeux lune lotus, yeux liane, lune nénuphar, les noms offerts par leur père, dignes de simples compagnardes, mais gardés comme des soieries sur leurs jeans t-shirt et des bottes en caoutchouc. Sur jeans, elles portent des t-shirts identiques. La paix, écrite en blanc, enveloppe leur poitrine comme des ailes, des bandages ou un bouclier. Thanks.
Merci beaucoup, mon ami. Très bien. Michelle.
Kia ora. Yes. Kia ora. This piece is called He Kohi or Babbler. I am not and have never been fluent in reo Māori. All I know is phrases from all mouths. It's been a while since I was rumbling with partial speech, playing hide and seek in the back garden of my nan's house, screaming, "Where are you?" as a wero to ever heard it. In the beginning, we all started as babblers, hiccuping nā kupu. I tried to put my pounamu on my niece, but she throws it in the grass or with her gums, chomping, gurgling, cutting her new teeth. Our girl is still babbling, but the language of anarchy is innate. Polished stone can feel as heavy as whakamā around the neck, and gems and bones are for trees anchored on the paipai. When I was young, I would say neho in the face of my matua keke, then run to the back room behind the whare nui with my cousins, climbing to the top of the mattresses, saying shh, shh. Us babblers always stay afloat. My niece sends me a mass of Facebook stickers that all say, she likes to mash the keyboard, she likes to make the screen dance. She uses te reo as a freshly bought card right out of the plastic. Some come in pairs, some come in singles, some are prettier than others. Her mum is studying Māori when she has time. She says, "Kai, baby," but Kai sounds like stasis, like an evening of imprisonment. It has no music. Whereas the sound of her koro knocking at the door is a bird song. Our girl greets it with ko, ko, ko. I see my niece still has some sign whenever she sees in the field, her fists clench and rock, mimicking the sway of the pommel on its back. My mama pushed me to keep up my sign, but language is impossible to barter with. Its skin is slick and slithering. You have to swim with it. You have to flow, to babble, to float on your back. Instead of standing with primordial swipe cards outside the door, hoping for access, he aha, he a. I am not and have never been fluent in te reo Māori, so I have to start at the beginning, at the age of the babbler. I have to return to the days where I shouted neho and ran for my life. I have to take that slow journey through maturity, kupu by kupu. When my reo grows, I will be able to follow the moko through the shrubs, and I may even find the small version of myself still hiding there. I may even be able to say, finally, tēnā koe.
Ka nui te pai, toi kupu e ho, ka nui te pai. Thank you very much for that. Excellent. Darren, would you like to share with us a piece written by you in the languages you're most comfortable with? One of the, you've expressed what a lot of us have expressed, that there's not just one Fijian language or one Chinese language. There's a variety of, not one Australian Indigenous language either, as Sophia pointed out. So please, Darren, the stage is yours.
Who knows how the wind blows, a journey of an island man. Now it's wondrous. Wananavu, talofalava, kia ora, whakalofalai atu, maloilelei, noia, aloha, iorana, kiorana, nisambula, coming from the north of Samambula, blooming like fruits, coming through the shoots. Islanders here not forgetting their roots. The vutu enanduana yanu pertaisi, erwana navuna kena itaukei, na ve yanu era mamarau yau vaka samataki le sutali, nongungauna, ngwingwi le dhavi ndendre, tinika vitu na embaki nongumbula ikea, me vakarau taki au kina vuruvura a drendre, Aotearoa sama itukina ongo, yau tungo me ambula, ko viti nangele keri na itaukei, era sa vaka vulidiau me au sasa ngaka vaka mbula taka na ya longu, na vosa indo tatangiringiri ndalingangu, vaka na lali, nyo vaka samataki ira tuyani, manianu ni vei mata ni diva. Mai viti ki Aotearoa na diwa rua, do tani na vanua, do na kavou, ochi e tinika vitu na ambaki ke se tunga na nungu vaka sama kiwali. Sandona ngoni salambala wa lakova mai, me vola na serikalingo, ni kua. Coming from an island paradise where the people are nice, the isles are full of smiles. I check back in time, memorable moments of mine, them beautiful days of my life, nurturing me for this world of strife. Learn all I can from the land. The people has taught me how to strive, fight, keep my mana alive. Memories of those times in my head, ringing like bells, thinking about my people back in the island of pearly shells. From Viti to Aotearoa in 92, a different land, something new. 27, 28, 30 years past, my memories of home still last. I have come a long way to rap this poetry here this day. In my mind, in my head, I can hear my ancestors say, try your best to never go astray. Try to tidy up on your yesterday. Never forget the old ways, my son. Listen, hey.
Very good, Darren. Excellent. It'll be great to see it in performance. So, Renee, how would you like to address the wide audience, not just us fellas on the sweep, but the huge YouTube crew watching? Renee, it's over to you.
Yes, so I'm going to read part of a piece that I wrote as part of a comedy sketch. I did a 5-minute comedy sketch my very first time during the comedy festival last year, and you have to imagine me at night standing on stage wearing my grandmother's chewing sam. I know some of you might be thinking, oh, she looks a bit exotic, and oh, how cute she's wearing national dress. Maybe she's going to teach us tea ceremony later or a bit of kung fu. But also it's the start of the night and the Asian gets to go first. So comedy in New Zealand is really diverse. But actually the reason I'm wearing this chewing sam is because this belonged to my mama. Her name was Grace Wong, and right through the 30s, 40s and 50s, she kicked ass with these tailored dresses. Her family was loaded. Her dad was a merchant in Hong Kong, and she went to school by sedan chair carried by men, which in my opinion is the only right way to go to school. As young women, Grace and her sister Harriet wore chewing sam to parties, to dinners, to anything, no matter what the occasion. And they had a tailor from Shanghai, one Mr. Wong, who went to their house to measure and fit. My mama kicked ass in other ways. After school, she decided to study nursing, which came in handy when our family became refugees, first running north away from the Japanese and then south ahead of the communists. See, the thing about being a refugee is not about being the strongest or the fastest or the luckiest. It's about how much resource you have to use to keep your family fed and sheltered. And my mama's ability to work as a nurse, she didn't mind. She worked with the nationalists, the communists, the American army. It was her ability to get a job that kept my family alive. She was gritty and determined. She lived to the age of 105 and never learned to cook. In her world, that was a job for the servants and the men. I really look up to women like my mama and my pawpaw, my grandmother. She was incredible too. A chain-smoking, potty-mouthed woman who lived to embarrass her adult children. They were amazing examples of the Cantonese auntie. Cantonese aunties don't give a fuck what anyone thinks. They stand for their values and they'll protect their family with everything they've got. And now that I'm older, I too do not give a fuck. And I aspire to be a Cantonese auntie. So I asked my friend Audrey Chan in the audience for advice on how to be a great, no give a fuck Cantonese auntie. And I'm going to share with you what she and my grandmas taught me. So first, you got to look the part. You got to stand like this and practice doing this with your mouth. and doing this with your eyes, and the arms are really important, then you've got to match your voice and tone. For example, if I say, "Le ho lak," which means you're so clever, but if I say it like this, "Le ho lak ma," you know exactly what I mean, right? Or you can just let the words and the eyes do all the work. "Chi sin," which literally means you're crazy, you got your wires crossed. The great thing about using the Cantonese language, which, by the way, I am trying to reclaim, is that it's really, really graphic. So you could say this, "Le hum hu panyan," and that literally means you hold the blood in your mouth and then you spit it at people. It means you're not a very nice person who harms people for no reason. Or you could just go for withering disdain. And this is the one I would like you all to repeat after me and take home, because it's the ultimate put down for men. It translates as idiot man. So lol. So that's my last. So lol.
Koi say. Excellent. Very good. Some great. And of course, just a throw in a little fillet here that you probably all know this. A book coming out, edited by myself and young Michelle Elvey, who has another language, of course, some sort of American twang, of microfiction, flash fiction. So the call is out for you to submit something in your own language or translingual, bits of both languages. If it's totally in your own language or languages, an English translation as well. So submissions are open now. I'd love to see something from everybody on this panel and anybody else in the wider community. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. I'm not going to go around name by name, but the other part I had was, what can be done to promote your language or languages more? Who would like to speak first? I don't think it's sensible to go through name by name by name. Have an open discussion. What can be done to promote your languages? Who would like to speak?
Well, we've actually been having, sorry,
Yeah,
do you want?
Just a brief technical input about, because this is really, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of linguistic relativity, where people associate languages with thinking modes. So I think the best thing we can do to promote our languages is to show people what is unique about our languages that adds to people's worldviews, because that's the beauty of it. That's what this whole diversity is about added insight, added angles, and just a broader view on things. That was just my 20 cents.
Excellent, excellent. So Renee, you were going to say something.
Yeah, we've
Please.
been having a little chat in the background about how we reclaim our languages and promote it, but also how I guess sometimes people try and take our languages and name it for themselves and change it for themselves. And Michelle, I know you've had a lot to say on this, and I'd like to hear it coming from you, because it is your language that we see being affected the most in Aotearoa. But from my point of view,
Speak it.
you have this shame that comes if you are a language speaker but you can't speak it, and for those of us who have multiple languages, there's extra shame involved in all the bits. And so my feeling is that firstly, our own relationship with language is for only us to name. It is part of our culture, our identity. Often we come from very multiple traditions, and no one else has a right to define our relationship with our language, or indeed our language. If we want to change it, it's our language. We should claim it. And yeah, I mean, I just think that things like language days, they're really important, and they're obviously often promoted by people with really sincere backgrounds, but also they can be taken over by an agenda and by other people who maybe don't understand but kind of see the value of using it or commercializing it or whatever. So it's a very difficult and very diverse, difficult and multi-layered conversation to have.
I would just say it, speak it, sing it, shout it, bring it into your life, bring it into your everyday life, in whatever capacity you can. I think that's what we can do for our language. Make it your own, make it part of who you are.
which you're doing. Yes.
Wait, sorry, real quick. Yeah.
No hurry. Man lai.
Hello.
Man lai, which is just slow. Man lai. Opanga. Plenty of time.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one, and it is relative to the language that you are speaking about, and then by extension, the community and the whānau that is connected to that language, the identity that sits within that language. For Te Reo Māori, like I said earlier, because of the state of the language and because of the resources available, it is really important just for that language to survive and to thrive, for the communities that develop it and own it, like Māori, they really need those resources to build up the language so that everyone in those communities can speak it and be connected to that po that connects us to our tupuna, and also, you know, that we have that gift back, that we have our language back. But then when we're speaking about sign language or New Zealand Sign Language, I think because that language is strong, it's really helpful for people to use it outside of the community, because that's going to be a bridge between you and the deaf community. Of course, I still advocate for that ownership, because deaf are the natural kaitiaki of that language. They're the ones that are developing it and developing the culture, and I mihi to them all the time, because they've done a brilliant job of that. But yeah, I think when we're talking about New Zealand Sign Language in Aotearoa, it's really helpful for people to go ahead and learn how to have those basic sentences, have that basic knowledge of the language, so that our deaf whānau aren't relying on someone else or their own experiences to try and bridge the gap. So yeah, I encourage people to learn New Zealand Sign Language, because you're missing out on conversations with amazing people if you don't. But yeah, kia ora.
Darren, how best to promote your languages, do you think, please?
I just want to give thanks for being in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I feel it's a blessed place, especially for Polynesians and Pacific people at this time, knowing that Auckland is one of the largest Polynesian cities in the world as well, and that we celebrate language weeks, and which is not just Fijian language, but it's all the Pacific language weeks that we celebrate. I think there's 8 now on the yearly calendar, and it's awesome to be in those weeks and speak those languages, just even if you say basic hellos and sort of korero, talanoa with different languages in the Pacific. I also have a real passion for linguists and people who love languages, and I also love the sort of the sound of languages. I try to teach my sons, especially when we're going on car rides and stuff, when we sing our prayers, try and say prayers in Fijian and try and do some of the hymns and some of the chants in Fijian. So that's one way I try to keep it within my family as well. But yeah, in terms of my writing, I always try to be, like I said, pan-Pacific, because I was born and raised in Fiji, but I'm also connected to other islands like Wallis and Futuna, where my name Kamalieli comes from. And my great-grandparents eloped to Fiji 4 generations ago, or 5 generations now. And so, yeah, it's very saturated with, although I grew up in Melanesia, I still have connections to other parts of Pacific. So yeah, I try and keep that going in my sort of poetry, even if it's 1 or 2 words from Maori and from other Pacific islands. Vinaka, yeah.
Vinaka anō. And of course, we come back to Sophia, who is promoting the languages at home with her homeschooling. Sophia, what's your kōrero?
I would just say maybe just slightly less expectation that everybody learns and speaks English, and willingness to go the other direction a little bit more as well, so that we are just having more of that sharing and sort of effort across the board with languages. So yeah, I think if we don't use languages, we will lose them. So speak them, and especially if you have a love for them and you have that sort of connection with the languages that you are learning, I think it just breathes a sort of life into things that otherwise won't be there. So yeah.
But what languages are you teaching your own tamariki? What languages are you teaching them?
We're learning. I'm teaching myself the Mandarin Chinese, and then as I go, I'm making them learn it with me. The poor things, they find it quite hard. They're not particularly enjoying it, but we're getting there. We're also I'm trying to speak French to them because that's easier for me to do. So they're sort of picking up a bit of French, and we live in Aotearoa, so we're learning like very beginner toddlers, te reo, starting off there. And
thing on the phone, really?
in the background, we have Russian and Italian going on, but I'm not making my kids learn that yet. They're hearing it. Yeah.
But you're hoping they'll go out into the community when they're older and speak those languages.
I'm hoping that they will have this sort of broad ear and understanding and love for languages. And if they want to, they can really then, because I do think you have to work hard to learn another language. Actually, you have to not just love it, but you have to put in that diligence and effort. So I'm hoping that they'll connect with one or more of these languages in a way that they'd really like to become fluent, and hopefully the world will be the kind of place that they can visit relatives, or it hasn't been like that for a while, but hopefully they will have the means and ability one day to visit other countries. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. Yeah. Just to throw in a little personal filler here. Nowadays, I wrote mainly in Te Reo Māori because that's who I am. And bugger if I don't understand it. Learn it. That's the way I write. Okay. Because I'm more comfortable with it. We keep getting little flashes saying it's time to wrap up soon. I just want to say thank you to everybody. It's a wonderful session. It's available on YouTube. Get those submissions into the anthology of microfiction in translingual or your own tongues. And Michelle, can we go back to you just very quickly? And can we ask you if you can say goodbye in Koda? Because we didn't see enough Koda. We had too much of us going blah, blah, blah. Michelle, can you say goodbye to us in Koda, please?
Apologies, I think there must be a miscommunication. Coda means child of deaf adult, which is my identity marker. Like I sit within the deaf community that way. So yeah, New Zealand sign language is my language.
Yeah, I thought, yeah, okay. But can you say goodbye in New Zealand Sign Language? And we'll finish off the panel with you doing that.
Okay, I'll say good afternoon because goodbye is kind of boring. It's just a way. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you to everybody. We'll leave the panel now. It's basically over here. It's 12:14 because we're 4 hours behind, whatever that means, time in Aotearoa. Although Renee will have the same time zone as me. I'm going off to Tin Ho now, to the Hong Kong Writers Centre in Hui. You guys will all be going to church now, I guess, over there. Okay, we can leave now. Thank you. Much appreciated. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.